Entering day 2, 7 and 10 here, both of them. It is, from their position, 3 wins makes it into Sunday. Dilks on the play will start out on Gilded Goose. So in this matchup, we saw yesterday a Jund Sacrifice mirror, and once they get enough moving parts going, the deck does insane things. That said, do you expect much interaction as they both set up?
So this is a spot where both players are kind of playing low to medium interaction decks that are just trying to go over the top of the other player. You know, your Nissa Hydrid Krasis combo of drawing 6 cards and making a 12/12 flying creature versus a deck that almost feels like, if you remember the game Katamari, where you build a big ball, but the point of building a big ball is just to build a bigger ball.
Right.
This is very similar to that, where you play cards, and the point of playing these cards is to get more cards.
So we Gilded Goose into Trail of Crumbs for Dilks. He uses one of those food to activate Trail of Crumbs, finding a second copy of the enchantment.
And this is, honestly, that line kind of just defines exactly what this deck wants to be doing. You just play these enchantments out, create resources on the battlefield for the sake of generating more resources.
Second trail here, so Dilks, this will have him set up very well to get a fistful of cards. Zach with a Growth Spiral. Now, if both players just do their own thing here for 5 turns, who do you think ends up in the better spot, end of turn 5?
So a lot of that's going to come down to the specifics of the cards that players actually have. With the Simic Ramp deck, there are a lot of cards that are good at setting up and kind of emulate payoff cards a lot of the time. These are your Cavalier of Thorns, Risen Reef-esque cards. But ultimately, Alan needs to find something like Hydrid Krasis, like Nissa, like Finale of Devastation to literally close the door. And I think that Dilks' deck, especially when you have these Trail of Crumbs, has a bit more velocity to find its payoff cards in Corvold and Mayhem Devil. So I like the Jund Sacrifice side of things here.
So the pressure then is on Zach to end this game.
Correct.
See, with Growth Spiral there from Zach. We're going to take a look at his deck. Some main deck hate cards here. There are 2 copies of Aether Gust in the main. We do have a lot of players here on Simic Ramp, but the builds are different. Zach was quick to point that out when talking about this. Has Aether Gusts. He has 3 copies of Gadwick in the main and 1 copy of Mass Manipulation. He believes he is set up better for the mirror, better for Jund Sacrifice, and worse for Bant Flash as compared to a traditional ramp deck.
Right. This is something that I had the chance to talk about Drake Sasser, who worked with Zach Allen and Harlan Fuhrer for this event, and their entire plan was to create a deck here that was able to beat up on the other Simic Ramp decks. After the results last weekend, he expected to see more of that sort of strategy coming into this event.
Back to Dilks we go. So it was Leafkin Druid and Paradise Druid for Zach. So a triple ramp there. Spiral into a pair of mana creatures.
Call that Druid synergy.
One of each kind. From Dilks' side, he actually doesn't have too much removal or ways to knock these mana creatures off the board outside of, looks like, these 4 main deck Mayhem Devils and 2 Murderous Riders.
Right, and you really want to be saving your Murderous Riders for things like Nissa. When you only have 2 copies of this Hero's Downfall-esque mode in your main deck, you kind of have to prioritize sending it after the more impactful cards.
Actually, I should correct myself. There is another way to remove these. A 1 single main deck copy of Massacre Girl in Dilks' deck would actually be an incredible draw here.
Sure, and another thing that Dilks can be building towards here is Casualties of War, which is something that can attack several of Alan's resources at the same time.
For Dilks, a 3rd Trail of Crumbs. Now, Emma, at some point, it feels like he's not going to have the mana to activate all of these.
Right, and you aren't necessarily always activating every single copy of it. You're generating resources that you can sacrifice to something like Corvold to just actually slam the door shut on Alan.
We see Cauldron Familiar from Dilks. Once he gets a Witch's Oven set up, this should start to pop off.
Oh, absolutely. At this point, it really is just Dilks looking for a way to close the game out.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, I'm starting to see what you're saying with that. At the end of turn 5, Dilks is going to have the better board, so there is pressure on Zach to really do something here.
Right. Having this Goose and a Trail of Crumbs draw on the play, that's the plan. That's what Jund Sacrifice wants to be doing every single matchup.
Right, Dilks isn't going to run out of resources here. On Zach's side, you see him leaving those 2 forests untapped. Whatever could that be? It is Nissa who shakes the world.
And, this is the way for Alan to end up coming out ahead in this.
Floats 2 mana. And untaps with Nissa. Breeding Pool here. So 3 mana is going to make Risen Reef. The ramp continues. Does not
One
land
in the
there.
Pool here. Maybe an Arboreal Grazer coming down.
Looks like he's going to let the mana clear and attack with his 3/3.
And the nice thing about Breeding Pool and Nissa here is now Alan has the ability to hold up something like Aethergust for a Mayhem Devil or a Corvold.
Right. Nissa's ability says when you tap a forest, you get an additional green mana, but if you don't have to tap the forest for green mana. You can tap the Breeding Pool for an island, and then you still get the bonus green mana.
Right, and that's just such a big difference between some of the draws these Nissa decks can have.
Attack comes in. On Dilks' side, blocks with Cauldron Familiar, and then Trail of Crumbs is used, and he finds a Witch's Oven, and you start to see the pieces getting put together here.
And it looks like he finds a Beanstalk Giant off the second one, which is going to get him that red source he's been looking for here. And we see after all this has been done, Dilks full grip of cards on his side. Now he just really wants to try and find a way to answer this Nissa.
Fabled Passage from Dilks. Goes and finds a mountain, so now has red mana available. We saw that he got that Witch's Oven off Trail of Crumbs last turn. Still has Cauldron Familiar in the graveyard as well.
The loop, ready to be established.
It's interesting to look at a board where one side has Risen Reef, Planeswalker, 3 other creatures, and then you wonder whether that board's going to be good enough.
Yeah, and it will be if this Nissa can stick around. That's really what Alan is hoping to happen here.
Yeah, if Nissa sticks around, you get the ability.
It's
to
just
cast some pretty
so
big cards.
much mana if you get to untap with that card. And it's a ramp deck, ultimately, right? It has ramp in the archetype name. Alan has a pile of X spells in his deck to pay him for putting this card onto the battlefield.
Beanstalk Giant going to go off on an adventure. That will grab another basic for Dilks.
This is not one of those matchups where the Beanstalk Giant body is going to end up being very relevant. There are so many mana creatures that can just jump in front of it.
Yeah, as strange as it seems, a 7/7 or an 8/8 actually just isn't a good enough card here. What Dilks needs to be doing is full comboing.
Right, without any kind of evasion or trample being on that card, its body is just going to get invalidated.
Back to Zach we go. Dilks does have it set up pretty well. 22 life and some chump blockers here with Cauldron Familiar and Witch's Oven to stave off these attacks for a while.
Right. The big issue is that at this point, Jund Sacrifice has a bunch of things that are going to give you marginal advantages. We've reached a phase of the game where the Simic ramp deck is playing with hammers, and that's to say cards like any of its X spells, Hydroid Krasis, Gadwick, maybe even Mass Manipulation. Manipulation's not as good on this board necessarily, but you get the idea. These X spells are going to just be so much more powerful than putting 2 or 3 cards in your hand with a Trail of Crumbs, if it's still just putting things like Cauldron Familiar into your hand.
2 attackers now from Nissa. And this is kind of where you start to see some of the difficulty of attacking. A block with the Cauldron Familiar throws it into Witch's Oven, gets a food token. Dilks does take one hit, goes to 19, but you don't expect that to last. And we might have just seen a pass from Zach.
Yeah, no, it looks like he might just be a little bit flooded on lands here.
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly hoping to see something like Hydroid Krasis, Gadwick the Wizened, Cavalier of Thorns, something that he can use to continue to add to the board.
Right, this is not the flash deck. This is not signaling something like a Frilled Mystic. This is a sign of weakness from Alan's side of the battlefield. Really only Growth Spiral and Aether Gust are going to be doing anything from him here on Dilks' turn. Luckily, he does have that Castle of Antris to at least get him closer to something on the following turn, and it's unlikely he literally dies during Dilks' next turn.
Another Gilded Goose from Matthew Dilks. And we see another Cauldron Familiar. Now, the second Familiar, when you talk about this deck's scaling ability, isn't actually as important as the second Oven.
Correct. See, here, you can't actually sacrifice and loot both of these cats without multiple copies of Witch's Oven. And that can end up being a bit of a problem. On the other hand, having a bunch of untapped lands like this is a lot of Trail of Crumbs looks.
Go over to Zach. Yeah, and so Zach, you see actually digging for something here. It's just Castle of Antris, the Scry 2 ability that he's able to do on end step.
Couple cards on the bottom. Let's see if he can find something. Ooh, Castle Garenbrig doesn't count.
No, that's more mana.
Love the mana.
Digging really hard here, though, on Zach's side. With Castle of Antris, he should be able to eventually find something here.
Okay, so this is relevant. Look at how much loyalty is on that Nissa.
All right.
That's very close to ultimating here.
Right, Nissa can ultimate. Now, you generally build this Nissa up to 9 before -8ing it.
Well, so one of the things I would imagine Alan has in hand right now is another copy of Nissa, right? He kept his hand for a reason. He's not doing other things with the cards in his hand. I would expect there's another copy of it here. So it's very likely he floats some mana, ultimates Nissa, and then just casts another Nissa and goes about his business that way.
Cauldron Familiar sacrificed to the Witch's Oven, so it's going to be just taking 3 again for Dilks as he puts both cats into the graveyard. Down to 18, and there's just so many Trail of Crumbs activations at the ready here.
Right, he's going to get so many looks. If he can just find a Corvold, a Mayhem Devil here would be incredible. More Witch's Oven.
All right, so he gets a Witch's Oven. And are we looking at value, or are we looking at a complete win?
At this point, we're still kind of looking at value, but those things... The details are different, but the flavor is kind of the same, right? Things like Corvold and Mayhem Devil are the inevitability that this deck has.
Well, Witch's Oven and the first Trail of Crumbs, then Corvold, third one, Mayhem Devil, and he'll have all 3. Finds a land, but he actually still needs lands here, so a pretty good set of cards.
One of the defining features of this standard format is being able to use all of your mana all the time. And this is something that the Jund deck is very, very good at, is just filling in the cracks of its curve.
Yeah, and we're seeing that's where Zach's running into problems. I mean, he is using his mana on Castle of Antris, but that is not a great mana sink.
5 mana Scry 2 is not what you build your deck for, you know?
Right. Brings back the second cat. Looks like Dilks just wants one more card. He's going to find Thrashing Brontodon. And no more mana for the other Trail of Crumbs. But he does get a drain of 2, so Dilks back up to 20. Zach now down to 14.
Casual draw 4 cards on instep. No big deal.
3 mana from Dilks going to be the Thrashing Brontodon. He found off that Trail of Crumbs.
Big show of patience, not just playing the Corvold here. That's a sign that he has a read on something like Aether Gust from Alan and is wanting to play around that.
And casts the Witch's Oven. At a certain point, with enough of these Witch's Ovens and Cauldron Familiars, he may not even need the Corvold.
Right, it's trying to turtle up and reach a point where he can cast multiple Mayhem Devils in the same turn and just punk Alan out of the game. Right. Remember, every time these Cauldron Familiars come back, they drain Alan for 1.
Right, so I mean, I'm just looking at this board now with 2 Witch's Ovens. We have the situation where he says, go, Dilks can block some attackers, draw 3 more cards, gain some life. Assuming there's maybe he finds a couple Mayhem Devils in here, casts them all and wins, and Corvold will never have come into play.
Right, when we're not far from that reality.
Yeah, Zach just looking for a way to go over the top. Despite the fact he's a ramp deck, he's actually getting out late gamed here. So mana starts to float here. He has 5. I mean, would love to find things like his one of Mass Manipulation. But he will use the -8 on Nissa. So he gets an emblem with his Lands Controller Indestructible, and he can get any number of forest cards out of his library and onto the battlefield tapped.
Do you think he's going to pay 2 life for those breeding pools?
Well, he could. We won't know.
I mean, they won't come into play on tap, but you are allowed to pay 2 life.
You may pay 2 life.
That is allowed.
You learn that one online. You click the yes button, you lose 2 life, and then it's still tapped. You say, oh, okay, yeah. I'm not going to do that again.
Oh, yeah. It's just love to have the clock eaten up. No, 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 no.
So Zach gets all the forests out of his deck. Still feels like we are a turn away from a game-ending play from Zach, and I don't know that he'll get that next turn.
Right, if Dilks can just find, say, 2 copies of Mayhem Devil, he just slams the door shut on this game.
Right. And Zach cannot spend the mana.
Oh, he's spending it.
He's spending it. He has another Nissa. Well, correct here. Untaps one of the lands. Remember, these are now indestructible, so no harm in sending them all as attackers, even though Thrashing Brontodon is on the battlefield for Dilks. It's not lethal yet, though.
Classic. Attacking for 12 indestructible across 3/3s.
Yeah, it's fine.
Dealing 1 damage.
Yes. That is what's happening.
Deal 1, lose 2. The classic.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, there's a third
Cauldron Familiar, so now Dilks will go to the Trail of Crumbs.
Excuse me. Zach Allen will be the one losing life here.
Casualties of War was in the top 2. That's something that Dilks can't take. Right now, he's just found lands, and that might be it.
Really looking for those Mayhem Devils here. Right. Bright side, one of those lands is a Fabled Passage, which is something you sacrifice.
Okay. So, Dilks makes some blocks. He's going to sacrifice 2 of the Cauldron Familiars. Yeah, does not take any damage that turn.
What a game.
At some point, right, and I like this, we get to see both decks scale up over and over here.
Right, this is a spot where it's turn 8, turn 9, and both decks have upwards of 20 permanents and or 25 mana.
Cauldron Familiar, recast by Dilks. That is the last copy. Finds Witch's Oven. Does it again. Finds Mayhem Devil.
All right.
Hold on. Now, we know Zach Allen still has an Aether Gust. And there's 2 more Mayhem Devils. Only can take 1.
Jeez. Putting one of those on the bottom is a big feel bad here.
Right. And one of the things I like is that if Dilks doesn't want to try to go for the win this turn, I don't know that he has it, he probably can get himself yet another turn.
Right. This is a spot where, remember, sacrificing Bronodon to Oven is 2 food.
Right, it
So
has
that
enough
gets
toughness.
back 2 of the cats here.
I mean, yeah, dinosaur is very meaty. Gets 2 full servings out of a fully grown dinosaur.
That was a curse sentence. Didn't like that.
There you go, Aether Gust.
It's one of those words
Puts it
like
back.
moist. I just don't like the word meaty. I don't know
Meaty.
what it is. Let's not say it.
Look.
Let's,
We-
we just don't have.
Back when our ancestors
saying
used to
this,
eat dinosaurs,
you know?
see? When they would hunt them and put them in ovens.
Oh yeah, I hate this.
They would hunt down the Brontodon and provide a 2-day feast after catching such a large creature.
Nobody is making you do this. We just really don't have to.
Whereas on the on the non-feast days, we would eat cat.
I can't remember the last time I wanted a bit to end this badly. All right, so Alan getting another untap step, really hoping for a Hydroid Crisis here. That may be
Right.
the point where something like a Mayhem Devil just isn't going to be enough.
Right, and Dilks smells that this is getting toward the end of Alan's defenses. Both main deck copies of Aether Gust were used that turn. Those are the most interactive cards Zach has. So Dilks knows that next turn he can just cast all his things and they will work.
Right. This is
Zach's
Alan's
last
moment.
turn. Right, there's just no way Alan gets another turn after this.
I
mean,
would
maybe not
imagine
no way,
not.
but-
Both of those Mayhem Devils are on top, so he'll draw one for a turn and get the other one off Trail of Crumbs, and then the
Yeah.
world's just his oyster.
We see Gadwick the Wizened.
Oh,
from Zach.
that's going to draw a few.
So, blue, X. When it enters the battlefield, draw X cards. When you cast a blue spell, tap a non-land permanent target an opponent controls. Which, that ability doesn't actually play too well here.
Well, the bright side, this gets him 7 cards closer to a Hydroid Crisis. It's hard to imagine him bricking off at this point.
But if he needs to win this turn, he needs to either win or put up some defenses. And I don't see either of those right away.
Well, Hydroid Crisis does gain a ton of life.
Okay, might actually be able to get him out of range.
Right, and the nice thing is when your Hydroid Crisis gains a ton of life, it also puts a ton of flying pressure onto the battlefield.
That's true. We look at these land counts here. All the forests in the deck are in play. They all produce 2. It could be a very large Hydroid Crisis. So here's Leafkin Druid. Maybe he's trying to draw into the Crisis.
Right, every time he casts just any elemental, Risen Reef is going to get him just a bit closer, but he can't really afford to sink too much mana into this.
Yeah, each 2 mana that goes into this is 2 mana that's not going into Hydroid Crisis. So 3 mana from Zach. You see floating, so that's going to be Growth Spiral with green floating. He is going to tap the Brontodon. Now, I do have a question here. If Zach can't win this turn and he finds cards like Growth Spiral, can he use Gadwick and Growth Spiral to tap down the Witch's Ovens? And if it does it buy him a turn?
It's
Upkeep.
possible. I would put it as unlikely just because there are so many cats. Corvold is also a sacrifice outlet here. The geese sacrifice permanents.
You wouldn't want to count on it.
Right. I'm under the impression that Dilks will find a way to either recur enough cats or sacrifice 3 or 4 permanents to just slam the door shut here.
And Cavalier of Thorns from Zach. That's going to get him 2 cards. 1 off the Risen Reef, 1 off the Cavalier. But again, this isn't Hydroid Crisis. 5 cards. Gets a land. It's an island.
None of those reveals being Crisis is good for Alan here.
Right, he just wants to hope that there's still a Crisis in his deck somewhere. At some point, though, he's drawn a lot of cards. I would be concerned about whether or not Crisis starts to draw all his cards.
Yeah, and I'm double checking the list right now. He does have 4 of them. He just really needs to find one.
Yeah, I know, right? We were looking at that. It's like, come on, he's a Simic Ramp deck. He has to have 4 Hydroid Crisis.
Yeah, it's kind of reached the point where I had to look back at the list.
Yeah.
I guess there's a chance they might have leaned into Gadwick to just try and draw more cards. Let's make sure. But no, it looks like Alan is just struggling to actually find the card.
And we've found one. It is Hydroid Crisis from Zach. How big? We'll see. Looks
8,
like 1, 2,
10.
3, 4, 5 cards. So it looks like it's a 10-10. He gains 5, goes to 17. Is this enough?
If he doesn't do something similar to what you described before about tapping those witches ovens in the upkeep, I don't think so.
And that's wild to think here, that you look at Zach's board and say, yeah, I just don't know that that board has enough going on.
Well, the thing is that 12 damage is not 20. It's a lot less than 20, as a matter of fact.
About 8 less.
Give or take. You're the math person here.
And taps the forest. Big attack here for Zach. And this, yeah, we're just going to see. It's really going to come down to a game of who can go bigger. Zach has made the biggest plays, I guess, his deck can make outside of this one mass manipulation that he hasn't drawn yet.
Yeah, that's about... This is about as big as he can go. He really needed to find Hydroid Crisis earlier in this chain to say, this is no exaggeration, just make it a 20/20 flying creature.
Two blocks, sacrificing, gets 2 food with the ovens. Dilks goes down to 12 on the swing.
After that, still has 8 mana available? No
I mean,
big
yeah,
deal.
he's ultimated Anissa. But yeah, it's pretty impressive. And it's going to go for another Hydroid Crisis. And why not? Crisis for 6.
All he can do is pad his life total as much as possible, and this is just saying, all right, Dilks, who's
Right.
dead?
This means there's none of those growth spiral plays we mentioned.
Nope.
Alan with the life gain here. Is that going to be enough? Pass back to Dilks and see. It's going to be close.
Yeah, I imagine that Dilks is going to be able to close it out here. I know 18 sounds like a high life total, but remember, each of these ovens is X permanents being sacrificed. Two Mayhem Devils is at least 2 points per sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
The cats, you can even retain priority and sacrifice multiple foods before bringing each of them back. This is a tall order for Alan to survive this turn.
We see this from Dilks. So here we go. Starts with Mayhem Devil.
Rips it off, slams it. He knows this is the
it's there.
turn.
Cauldron Familiar number 1 out of the graveyard. Sacrifices a food, so can get a Trail of Crumbs trigger. So that will drain for 2. So 1 from the Devil, 1 from the Cauldron Familiar. So Zach's going to be at 16 here. Finds another Mayhem Devil.
On the top from Aethergust, barely even looks at the other card.
It's hard to think there's anything better to cast than that second Mayhem Devil.
Right.
That will be the play for Dilks. So second Mayhem Devil.
Imagine Fabled Passage will end up being the land for a turn, since it's a shock land, but the other direction.
If your opponent takes 2, it enters the battlefield untapped. So, Fabled Passage, Zach to 14.
Yeah, so each of these Witches' Ovens represents
It's 3.
5 damage.
5, right.
So you sack the cat, which is 2, and then sack the food, which is 2, and then the cat trigger is 1.
So that's already 15 right there.
This is deterministic. I believe Dilks has sealed this game, and it's a matter of going through the motions for the next
he actually should have
so.
this. He probably has Zach from about 24 here, not just from 14.
You could even go higher than that because of the Gilded Geese. You can sacrifice Bronodon for multiple food.
Right.
There's so much damage here, and this is a lot of why the Jund Sacrifice deck is favored in the matchup, is because you have so much reach.
Well, you certainly had a ramp opponent get an emblem from Nissa, cast a Krasis for 10 and for 6 in the same turn, and we're still able to win. And that is what Matthew Dilks does, taking a game 1 where we really saw both decks play to their conclusion.
Right, and there is certainly a point where Alan flooded. Right, he took about 2 turns off in the middle there, and that's not something your deck can really afford to do when you're falling behind. But then on the sacrifice side of things, Dilks also spun his wheels and didn't find a Mayhem Devil until turn 8, I believe it was, turn 9.
Right. So I think we do see that on both sides, kind of as you're mentioning. Yeah, both players taking some time off. So we will look at the sideboards to kind of dissect what each player can do here. On Zach's side, it was those 2 turns of Castle Vantressing that felt like where he lost it.
Right. I completely agree with that. It's just, you can't really afford to take off turns like that. And he had the setup in the early turns, so it's easy to see why he kept the hand that he did. He had an Aether Gust most of the game. Dilks just didn't have the cards to make that really worth a card until it was too late.
Looking at the sideboard for Zach, shifting Ceratops, Aether, 2 more Aether Gusts, a Disdainful Stroke, 3 Mystical Disputes, a Negate, 3 Return to Nature, a Tameo, and a second Mass Manipulation. The 2 Aether Gusts looked pretty good there.
Big fan of Aether Gust here, since it answers a lot of the payoff cards. I also like Return to Nature. So most of the time that card is just naturalized with a very small amount of upside, but it hits both Witch's Oven and Trail of Crumbs, and those are 2 of the bigger engine cards for the Jund Sacrifice deck.
Right. That third ability, exiling a card from a graveyard, might every once in a while catch a Cauldron Familiar, but I do agree it's a naturalize.
Exactly. It's something where it might do that, but most of those cases you're going to want to hit the Witch's Oven anyway.
Right. So you can see those naturalizes then coming in.
Yeah, that's something that I would like to see be brought in by Alan here, and it feels pretty pointed for the matchup.
For Matthew Dilks, 3 Noxious Grasp, 3 Duress, 3 Lovestruck Beast, 2 Massacre Girl, 2 Wicked Wolf, a Murderous Rider, and a Thrashing Bronzodon.
All right, so here, top of the sideboard, the biggest change between this week's Jund Sacrifice deck and last week's, the Pyotr Glogovsky won the Mythic Championship with. These Noxious Grasps are great against specifically Nissa, who shakes the world. It's a concession to that card, to big Hydroid Krasis, and it can even hit Cavalier of Thorns in a pinch.
Yeah, it's a 2-mana card that should set Zach back a turn, which is Dilks should be very happy to have.
Right, and if Alan doesn't have something like a real counterspell, which he only has, 1 negate out of the sideboard, he's not actually going to be able to interact with it very well. The metagaming going on with all of these copies of cards like Aether Gust means that really everything's go for black spells. Mono black spells, that is.
So if you haven't a chance to look at the Star City Holiday Sale, that's going on all month. It is 15% off all online store orders from the SCG store. You can find that on our website. It is live now. Make sure you use the promo code on checkout of SCG15. That's 15 for 15% off.
So something else I would expect to come in out of Dilks' sideboard are those copies of Massacre Girl. That's one against anything playing a bunch of mana creatures is going to look absolutely incredible. Just imagine the chain of going kill a Paradise Druid, kill your own Cauldron Familiar, hit all the 3 X3s from Nissa and your Leafkin and Arboreal Grazer. There are all kinds of things that it can kill. And ultimately, Alan's payoff cards are mostly creatures.
Yeah, and that was something I was interested in. There's 1 Massacre Curl main. Dilks can board all the way up to 3 copies of it. Do you want 3?
I believe so. It's a card that's frequently going to be several Stone Rains, and that's got to be great against a ramp deck.
Quick mulligan for Zach Allen, something you don't like to see out of a ramp strategy.
Right. Your deck is very resource heavy in that it just kind of needs a lot of stuff to get off the ground. Things like Nissa, while strong, demand you have 6 pieces of cardboard to actually get them onto the table, including this, of course, Nissa 5 lands. Do you have an opinion on the Dilks jacket?
I like the jacket. I want to see the Dilks Tomiko jacket matchup. So if you didn't see, because Tomiko was challenging him on the jacket game yesterday.
Oh, Tomiko on social media he definitely leans into the fashion side of things.
Right. We had 2 excellent jackets yesterday. Dilks is running back the same one. Tomiko might be changing day to day.
Listen, sometimes you just got to have a good old-fashioned wardrobe change. Look at Dom Harvey bringing Ross Merriam to the Players' Championship.
We're hoping to see that one on camera. It is. It's a good shirt. Good outfit.
You could say Dom's not planning to board in any rec sages today. Zach, looking like this is a risky hand.
And going to 5.
And this is discipline, right? You're not going to let any of the matches, any of the games with this much intensity placed on them, this much emphasis placed on an individual game back against the wall. You don't want to have it come down to something like, I only have 2 lands in my ramp deck. If I rip a land, I'm fine. But, you're 30% to just not get to play Magic. Just look for a good hand. The London Mulligan fixes so much of those non-games.
On the play on 5, there's going to be some concern for Zach Allen.
On the bright side, this Jund Sacrifice, it's not killing Zach before what I think the earliest you could theoretically kill is turn 5, maybe, with Jund Sacrifice. So Allen does have time to rebuild and has a bunch of cards like Risen Reef that can do that for him.
Starts off on Temple of Mystery, keeps the land on top. For Dilks, starts to build up. Cauldron Familiar.
Uh-oh. Aggro strat.
Yeah, they're actually going to get some free points of damage in here. Or might. I guess sometimes Zach plays blockers. But I do like Dilks' hand. Caught a glimpse of both Mayhem Devil and Witch's Oven in the hand.
Hey, 0-3 blocker. Good against the
All
black
right.
1-drop stratagem.
Castle Lockman for Dilks. Love the attack. Swings in. That's not going to do anything, but
Call.
might as well try. Witch's Oven's the play, and a second Witch's Oven.
Call that the Tormenting Soul.
Yeah, so he's already just going to go ahead with these. Brings the cat back. That drains for 1. And not going to fire off the second one just yet.
No, at this point you can kind of just protect the card a little bit if you think Allen might have something that could do something to the cat.
I just like where Dilks is at. If he has a red mana source, next turn he can make Mayhem Devil, and he might not need much more. 2 Ovens, a cat, and a Mayhem Devil is a lot of damage.
Right.
Growth Spiral from Zach Allen. Gets him up to land number 4. Can tap 2, makes another Leafkin Druid, down to just 1 card.
A lot of mana, though.
Right. This is what he'd want in the early game.
So something I might like to have seen from Dilks is seeing him actually sacrifice the cat on his turn to play around the cat getting exiled by Return to Nature.
Third Witch's Oven for Dilks.
Ooh. Can you smell what the Dilks is cooking?
I think he's cooking cats.
Look what the cat dragged in.
2 Witch's Ovens is 2 more drains. But I don't, and this is an opening for Zach. Dilks missed the 3rd land drop. It's not just that he didn't have red, he didn't have any lands.
Oof. All right, well, okay, so this is a way that Zach gets in this game?
Right.
Uh-oh.
Castle Vantress. That's a land here.
Ooh.
And Gadwick the Wise. And Zach was down to 1 card, and that's a pretty good one, as it will draw him 4 more cards.
Mulligan to 5? More like Mulligan to 9. And this is going to make it hard for Dilks to block in some cases. Well, I guess actually that's not even true because of the ovens. Tap my cat, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, if he can find that red mana source And here we go.
Uh-oh.
Maybe it's just fine. So Dilks, let's get this. So Zach's to 15.
Whoa.
Here's Mayhem Devil. Hold on. So each of these Witch's Ovens now is 3 points of damage. Is that right? So these tap to Lava Spike.
So he can deal, what, 11 here?
Well, this is 1. Zach to 14.
He might end up going after
13.
creatures? I doubt it.
Right, so he has Zach to, I believe, we'll confirm he has Zach to 13 here, and then 3 ovens that tap to Lava Spike. So he's got him on a 2-turn clock.
Yeah, if Alan doesn't have something to answer this Mayhem Devil, that is the game.
Nice little set of uncommons you have here.
Love a good uncommon. Big
This
fan
is-
of the synergy stratagems. It looks like Dilks was just deciding if he wanted to try and interact with Alan's battlefield or just send all the damage upstairs. And if he has the read that Alan has a way to interact with this Mayhem Devil, you do likely want to go after those Leafkin Druids. The idea being that the way that Alan gets back in this game is he goes down to 4, plays a big Hydroid Krasis, and then things can spiral from there. But as it stands, Dilks is just saying, you know what?
3 damage.
We'll put
3
you
damage.
to 4. I'm feeling lucky.
Zach to 7.
Oh, is that another Mayhem Devil in hand?
So even if Zach has the Aether Gust, it might not be
He
enough.
needs 2 Aether Gusts here.
Yeah, and I don't think Zach can gain life to get out of range of this, especially because if he doesn't remove 1 Mayhem Devil, then Dilks' ovens tap for 5.
Well, if he has that Return to Nature, this would be one of those spots where exiling the cat from the graveyard could do it.
Is it enough? Because then you can start sacrificing Mayhem Devils to the oven.
Well, you only have 2 Mayhem Devils.
Sure.
That's not a long-lasting strategy.
To Zach we go, he has one of those Return to Natures, and he has a copy of Aether Gust. But backs to the wall here for Zach Allen. Nissa Who Shakes the World is the play.
Oh, this actually puts Alan in an okay spot where he can Aether Gust Mayhem Devil, then if Dilks goes to respond and use the cat, Alan can then exile the cat from the graveyard, and Dilks putting it on top of his library, if he puts the Mayhem Devil on top, won't actually be that strong unless he has another cat in his hand. It's very possible this is exactly the opening that Alan needed.
Here is the Return to Nature, and it looks like Zach's just going to use that on a Witch's Oven. So, in response, Dilks sacrifices the cat. 1 trigger on the stack. I think we're going to see an Aether Gust here. With the food creation trigger on the stack.
Okay.
That's Zach has held him there. And says, okay, you got it. Swing in for 6 from Zach.
Oh, and it may be Dilks has the read on another copy of Return to Nature and won't pull the trigger on this cat as a result.
Yeah, the only way for him to do that safely is to have 2 food in play.
Right. Or have, say, another Witch's Oven available.
Yeah, I mean, once he untaps the Witch's Oven, he can start going for that play. Worst case scenario, he has to sacrifice a Mayhem Devil, which is bad, but manageable.
Sure.
And a 3rd Mayhem Devil to draw for Dilks, and he's going to go for the win. Here is 2nd Mayhem Devil from Matthew Dilks. Zach, just 1 Aether Gust in hand. He can't gust both of them. These Witch's Ovens tap to deal 3, and he's looking at the board just to make sure there is no way out.
I don't see it.
And Zach, you see that shake of the head? He doesn't see it either. And he extends the hand. So it is Matthew Dilks, 2-0. Jund Sacrifice picks up the win. The higher seed moves on to the second round. And he'll lean back in the chair. So Zach, his first